And I've been doing environmental education work for about 10 years. About 5 years ago, I got really interested in more of the early childhood aspect of that. And so kind of shifted my direction, my interest and direction towards early childhood. Right now, I am a nature educator at a Montessori program in South Bend, Indiana. This is my third year being with that program. I'm work part-time with that program, and I also have two young boys at home. And so a lot of the things I end up doing at the preschool, I'm also sort of doing with them too. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'm Teresa Hinkle, and I work at, as Carla mentioned, at a excuse me, nature-based preschool in Noblesville, Indiana. We are a parent cooperative, so our parents are very involved in our school. And our school, through the need to relocate, ended up changing its name and deciding to go a little bit different focus, in that we changed our name to Nature's Point. It was Fisher's Point, and now it's Nature's Point. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to put our emphasis and focus on nature and having the children outside more than inside. And I have been with that cooperative for 15 years, since my oldest son, who's this freshman in college, was getting ready to start preschool. So that's where I'm from.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marcos, and as Carl mentioned, I work at Mary Lee Environmental Learning Center at Goshen College. So my background has been in environmental education and also in informal science education at invertebrate zoo, at a science museum, and those kinds of things, but also very much focused on outdoor and environmental opportunities. And most of the reason that I'm here as a panelist in this session is with our experience at Mary Lee, working with some local school districts to implement some forest kindergarten programs in a capacity building way, where we then passed over the program to the district as opposed to them continuing to be reliant on our nature center. And then also we started a nature preschool last year. So we're in the second year of exploring what that looks like. And that's a program that's done in partnership with the local YMCA. So I'm excited to be with y'all and to hear some questions and learn from my co-panelists.
Thank you. I really appreciate what each of you have to bring to the panel. And Janelle, my children, when they were younger, were often my guinea pigs for anything nature-based I did. So, yeah. And Teresa, 15 years. So have you— I think
that happens
for most people.
Go ahead.
15 years. So
yeah.
Were you part of that driving force to move your program more nature-based? Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Actually, I was. Yes, absolutely. Well, at our previous location, we unfortunately did not have an outdoor play space. And so when we moved to a church that has a beautiful space in their back, and we felt very drawn to it for that reason. And we felt like the one thing our school lacked was the fact that we were not able to be we didn't have that outdoor space. And so when we moved, I had been reading a lot of research about the importance of children in nature and the lack that they've, nature deficit disorder and things like that. And so I felt like that's where we needed to kind of start shifting our focus. And so our plan started with, what are we going to do to the outdoor space? We have all this room now, which we did not put up fences. Our school is not a licensed program, so we're able to not have fences, and our children know where they're allowed to go. So we really haven't had any children going outside our perimeter. But we just started kind of looking at what we wanted to do with our outdoor space. And I happened to go to the IAEYC conference, which is the Indiana Association for the Education of Young Children State Early Childhood Conference. Happened to hear a Nature Explorer workshop at that conference. Were you doing that one, Carla, or was there somebody else? I can't remember if you were doing that one or
Nature Explore themselves or us sharing about outdoor classrooms. I've done both, and I know that Nature Explore is there too.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we went to a workshop, and I believe it was Carla that was leading that workshop. And we were like, okay, we can do this. We can get certified. We just have to get focused. And so I purchased the book through Nature Explore. There's a booklet that talks about their certification process. And so we did a lot of reading. We were fortunate that we have a parent. She's still with our school. This is her last year, unfortunately, but she actually has a degree in design, and she's never been able to put it in practice. So she's practicing on our school, which is awesome. So she came up with a general design, and we tweaked it as teachers. We had to put our input and say, okay, no, this would work better over here. And every year we change it, because every year we're finding that, okay, well, the art, the art activities would be better, served over here, especially this year with COVID, since we're 100% outside. So we were able to get our certification. We're up for recertification this year, and actually I think the paperwork has even been submitted already. So that's where we kind of shifted our focus. And our children, we noticed a huge difference in our children's behavior from being outside, 100% of the time. We always, ever since I taught the 4s and 5s class, we always started outside. We'd spend a good amount of time outside, then we'd go inside, and then we'd come back outside. And then just last year, I started doing a forest day. So we take our children off site to the beyond, as was so eloquently spoken of yesterday. So with Rachel Larimore. And so we take our children beyond once a week, at least.
Thank you. And do you have forests near your space too that you can go into, or is that totally separate?
Well, we did.
Okay.
Unfortunately, right now it is so overgrown from us not being there since March that we are not able to go into. We're hoping that when the snow hits and stuff, that'll kill the weeds and we can get back there. But yeah, we have a space beyond our field that we were able to visit frequently, and unfortunately, like I said, we haven't been able to, but we would visit it frequently as well. So even if we didn't have a forest day, we were able to go out into the woods that way as well.
Yeah, I see that in my own woods, and I noticed that late fall through early spring, we can go out and be there because it's died back, but summertime is a mess.
Yeah.
It's doing what it's supposed to do. So
yeah.
Thanks for sharing kind of more about your outdoor space. And I'll ask Marcos and Janelle kind of about their outdoor spaces in just a minute. I did want to just kind of mention Nature Explore as well. It is kind of an outdoor classroom concept that does have a certification process that's based on research and such. I do consultations for them. And since I did that earlier one, I've since started working with them more pre-COVID, but they always have a landscape architect, but then also an educator to understand on their consultations, to understand what the needs of the educators are in those outdoor spaces, because it could be very different than what would look good outside. So we need to consider that educator perspective in any of the spaces that we're using. But and that's just one way of doing some outdoor spaces. And I love that you all do the Forest Friday and get to that beyond. What a powerful, powerful way to do it. And then also have an everyday place that you can just use.
Love those days.
So cool.
Yeah.
So
we did not use the landscape designer through Nature Explorer. It is kind of costly.
Yeah, it is.
So
but and you don't have to.
Like I said, we were fortunate that we had our own. Yeah.
And I remember visiting your space and you're like, oh yeah, we just haven't sent our paperwork in. And I'm like, and I just kind of went around and I was like, well, you just need to do this and this and get it done and send your paperwork in, So if anybody's interested in that, even on the do it yourself side kind of thing, which is what I did as well, feel free to reach out. But so Janelle, do you mind sharing what your outdoor space is like? So like, what do you have to work with?
Yeah. So the Montessori Center is located in the actual city of South Bend, in a neighborhood called River Park. And the director was fortunate enough to have access to a property that's actually right on the St. Joseph River. It's the actual property is it's a home-based program, and so it's a used to be a private dwelling. It's about an acre, and the front yard overlooks the river. Our property is partially fenced. We fence the river and the roadside because we think of those as being hazards as opposed to risks that children can safely learn to navigate. So the front is sort of more of a landscaped area, grass, that sort of thing. And then the backyard is actually, so the whole property is actually sits on fill dirt where they had filled in, they wanted to sort of chart the course of the river. And so they had filled in that area, but then there's a huge embankment that goes up in the backyard where it was the former riverbank. And so it creates sort of a bowl feeling in the backyard where the children are down low and they have this big embankment. So it creates sort of this really private, sort of magical feeling in the backyard. We've cut trails into that embankment where the kids can walk, and there's a big hill in the backyard where we can go sledding in the winter and roll pumpkins down in the fall. And it's definitely still a backyard, but it feels semi-wild. And I think to a child, it definitely feels very magical. And then the school also has what we call our farmette property, where we've got a potting shed, a greenhouse, a mini orchard with about 9 fruit trees, and then just a big open play space. We're hoping to get chickens this spring. And the children go up, we call it our farmette. They go up there every Thursday morning and just do more of a free play time up in that space. That's sort of our beyond right now. I'd love to find some other more wooded areas within walking distance of our school where we could take some more excursions, but it's also hard because we are really in the middle of the city.
What a neat space. I haven't been out. I need to come visit it sometime. So maybe we can arrange that in the spring. One thing that I've heard people talk about is get like an aerial Google map view of your neighborhood kind of thing, and then look for those green spaces where you're seeing more of the trees and stuff like that, and then start investigating some of those to see if there may be a little pocket park or a little green space. And then sometimes even if it's private property, just asking permission to see, hey, do you mind if we come every once in a while, and having some kind of liability sign waiver kind of thing is helpful for them. Marcos, you want to share about your space that you use and or you've seen people using?
Yeah, so first I'll just describe our nature preschool really quickly. And with that one, this is a program that we operate in conjunction with some partners at the local YMCA and school district. And so it's a single classroom, and the students start every day at the local primary school. And that's where they have their kind of morning routines, and they have lunch. And then they come out to Mary Lee every day in the afternoon. And that's a 4-day-a-week program, Monday through Thursday. So for the outdoor part of their day, they get unloaded at one of our parking areas that we do other programs, field trips and that kind of thing at. But then they walk about maybe a little bit more than 1/10 of a mile to get to our outdoor classroom. And Mary Lee is a 1,200-acre nature preserve. So we have a lot of space, but we've basically decided that on one little corner of that, in one little kind of corner of 2 trails intersecting, that we carved out a place that we are intending to be really high impact. And so that's where we've, cleared out some brush. We've done some really heavy poison ivy mitigation in that over, 2 years or so. And in that space, it's basically a woods that has, standing trees, low shrubs, some trees that we've cut down because they would have been fall hazards because of the ash borer, and that then turns into, for example, a climbing log and jumping log and everything else that you might think of. So we definitely are on the more natural side of things because we've had the land base to use for that. And then we from there every week try to make sure that we have some kind of an excursion as well. And so sometimes that's just, down the trail from the classroom to explore the prairie that's there. We have a sustainable farm on site that we visit as well to, visit animals or to harvest things out of the garden. But then other times we might actually go to a completely different part of the preserve as well, just to hike around and see vernal ponds or an observation tower or other things that our organization has available from an infrastructure perspective. And then real quickly, I want to mention that we've also worked with several districts for a kinder forest program. And the really quick version of way to describe that is it's a public school district that has committed to going outside at least once a month over the course of the whole school district. And just to kind of give a broad swath of what that has looked like, the first year or two, one of those districts came to Mary Lee, and we kind of said that there's a certain base camp area in and among whatever trees or prairie we had at the time. Another school, we helped to identify that there was a nearby park where it was walking distance from their school, and that's a park that's owned by the college. So we were able to use that space really well. And then since then, another district has identified that they actually have land on their property. And so they've transitioned to using the wooded area that their district owns as opposed to coming to visit Mary Lee. So we were really excited that we were able to help kind of scaffold that so that they learned a lot of the program with us, and then they were able to continue it on their own for longevity.
You've been involved in some really neat programs there, and 1,200 acres, how cool is that? But within that, you've kind of carved out a very natural space. It took some work, the poison ivy mitigation, the fall hazards, and with my tree climbing research, I know exactly what you're talking about. You don't want to have high winds and branches falling down on people. And I've been able to visit that. It's a great place, but it is a place where the children can pretty much freely play. It's not a look at nature space, but get into nature and explore and experiment with nature. And so that's one really key spot. So
we really said, as a nature preserve, a lot of times we're trying to keep it as a protected area, but we also have environmental education in our mission. And so, when we were discussing establishing this program, we talked with our land manager and said, hey, this is why we're thinking about doing this from a strategic reason. And so we specifically said, this is going to be the place where the kids are going to dig, and there's going to be a mud kitchen, and it's going to be high impact. We really expect this place to look worn when we're done with it each year. And we're only in the second year now. So one thing that we haven't yet figured out is if that will be our classroom in perpetuity, or if we might do it there for maybe 5 years or something, and then move to a completely different area and then kind of rotate over, I don't know what kind of a frequency, just to give it a chance to kind of rejuvenate it and that kind of thing. So that's still to be determined in our minds.
Yeah, and that's an interesting concept. Go ahead, Janelle.
Well, I'm curious about what you did for poison ivy mitigation. Can you talk more about what exactly you did?
Yeah, it's been a mixture of chemical spray and hand pulling. And so, depending on how sensitive you are to it, there's different levels of protection, whether it's ivy block or rubber gloves or all of the above, and kind of stripping as soon as you're done with it. But it's been an ongoing just kind of effort that we've tried to make it so that those students don't have to worry about that particular risk in their play space. We talk about it other places along the way, but we're envisioning that place to be a place where they don't have to worry about it. And so that's really why we've dedicated that energy to that area.
I've done something similar just in the play spaces that I'm using on the regular, not the beyond places. You can't really do all of that, but where we're just going to be playing, I want them to be able to just enjoy the mud or whatever. I don't want them to have to worry about it. So I just go hand pull and do a quick check before we get started with whatever session, and hand pull, just so that it's one less thing. They also wear suits usually when they're doing their programs. I'm not sure if the nature preschool does, but the kinder forest does, and which protects them from some of that as well. So yeah. So do you have a lot of poison ivy, Janelle?
We do, yeah. And I went through and volunteered to hand pull it this year and got it really, really badly.
Oh no, I use a plastic bag over my hand, but I get it badly if I'm not super, super careful. And I actively teach the children what it looks like. And what to be aware of it. Are there other challenges? Like you mentioned some hazards, Janelle, and how you separate that hazard from that risk. What other challenges do you have beyond kind of that physical space that you might consider as part of your program?
I think for us, weather has definitely been a challenge at times, and particularly in getting parents to consistently send appropriate gear. Right now, we are inside if it's raining because we haven't asked parents to invest in rain gear. But even just in snow gear, I mean, we lay it out. This is exactly what your child needs at the beginning of the year. But I think sometimes on the day-to-day, I mean, it's just hard to convince parents that, yes, you really need to send waterproof gloves every day. And so that's been a little bit of a challenge, but I think part of our story right now is that this program was a very traditional Montessori program 4 years ago, and then there was some staffing changes and the move to our current location. So this is really just our third year on site. And so part of it was the transition of the parents who were moving from the old school to the new school, who hadn't necessarily signed their kids up for nature-based Montessori. They had just, initially signed up for Montessori. And so part of it has just been, the graduation of some of the former parents, really being upfront with new parents and families that are enrolling about expectations, about nature-based and gear. And I think this year, because of COVID, we are dedicated to being outside as much as possible. And I think parents want that. And so I've seen, even just this year, parents are already sending kids in snow pants because they know it's going to keep them warm. They've already been sending the warm gear. And so I think that is coming, and there's a better culture around sending the appropriate gear. But that's been a challenge for us, sort of as we transition into that new way of being.
If it doesn't come back up again in these conversations with Teresa and Marcos, we will come back to gear just because it is a big deal for being outside. Teresa and Marcos, did you have anything else to add about those kind of challenges that you might have?
For ours, it's the maintenance of the outdoor space, because you do have to maintain it. Weeds are going to grow, and especially since we were out of our program from March until August, we had to have many work days getting our space, weeded, and new new sand put in the sand area. The dirt was all dried and caked, and for the digging area, and so we had to break up the dirt for the digging area. So just that maintenance part of it. And we rent space from a church, and so we have to maintain a certain level of cleanliness outside. We don't, they understand that it is a nature-based program, but they also want to maintain a certain look too. So yeah, maintenance has definitely been one of our challenges. We go through every day and look for any hazards that might be there, broken buckets, or shovels that are broken, or things that need to be tossed. But just the continual maintenance, nail pops from our mud kitchen being sitting there for a long time, that kind of thing.
Thanks. Maintenance really is an ongoing issue, and I'm glad you have that good parent support to help with some of those cleanup efforts. And I would say for more of those like outdoor classroom things, having maintenance people involved in that planning from the beginning, if they're doing the mowing and all those kinds of things, to make it as easy as possible for them. And it gives them buy-in when there is a stray shovel left out, and they like, oh, but the kids do so much with this, and they're more willing. It seems like if there is a key stakeholder in those conversations, it seems like they're more willing to put up with some of the things that happen with it. Of course, we try to be respectful, but also some of that. Marcos?
Yeah, we had to.
Go ahead, Teresa.
That I was just going along with that, Carla. We did have to have a conversation with the church because they mow the lawn, and we were like, okay, what are the things that you need us to do to make sure that, you know, you can mow without issue? And those were the things, you know, making sure shovels and things are picked up at the end of the day and put away. So, you know, that kind of thing. But we also have parents, and like I said, we are a co-op, but this is an idea for anybody who might have parent volunteers. We have 2 parents who that is their job, is to if we have any maintenance that needs to be done outside, they are dedicated for that.
Nice to have that support. Marcos?
Yeah, I guess I think of, you know, hazards maybe in 2 different categories. The first is what we need to do on an ongoing basis. And so like you said, Teresa, thinking about nails that are popping up just because of, you know, wood weathering and changes to the environment from the last time you were there. So like wasp nests is an example, I think, of that also. And then I also, it's because this is our second year, it's still fresh in my mind going through the process of assessing hazards kind of from a fresh lens or from like the first time. And so for us, when we were figuring out where our outdoor classroom was going to be, some of the things that we had to figure out was like old barbed wire fence that would have been indicating property lines before it became Mary Lee. And so we had to yank a bunch of that out, or some of the old ash trees that, you know, made us nervous. We didn't know exactly. And so we decided to turn that into an opportunity by, you know, removing the potential of those trunks or limbs falling down. And at the same time, because we have a maintenance team, I worked with them to be very specific about how to use that material. And so one of the trunks became our little stools for the kids to sit at for circle time. And rather than have them cut the trunk off kind of at ground level, we had this really cool ash that's got like 4 or 5 trunks that were all coming out at one spot. And so we specifically asked him to cut those at different heights. So they're almost like a stair step play, you know, element, so to speak. And so the kids can kind of be perched at those different locations. So those are things that I'm thinking of. But then also, like for us, the walk that they take from where they get off of the bus from the school to the outdoor classroom is right along a wetland. And so water is a hazard, you know, when it's water and when it's ice also. And so we talk about that with the students, and we make sure to have an excursion to go and play on the ice on the winter days when it's, you know, cold enough and safe enough. But we also talk through that with the students so that they can understand when we'll do that and when we won't. So I don't know if that kind of 2 bucket perspective is helpful for people that might be thinking of doing something new. But I think having a plan for kind of an ongoing basis, but also at the front end, was really helpful for our program.
Thank you very much. So you kind of talked about some of those challenges that you have different times in doing those benefit risk analysis for the different riskier type things that you do is very helpful. I was just talking to one of the past presenters about fire at a situation, you know, and you know, being able to take that plan, you've thought through the benefits of having this, you've thought through all the hazards that may be there and taking care of those hazards. You've thought about your safety precautions and the risks and how you're going to mitigate any risks to make it as safe as possible. It can be really powerful. How do you embrace risky play in your space? And it may not be embracing, I don't know.
We do a lot of educating of the parents to help them understand the importance of risky play. We allow a lot of risky play. They play with sticks. They carry huge boulders, you know, boulders in their estimation, big rocks. We allow them to climb on logs and up trees if the trees are, you know, where they can climb them. We only ask that we ask what their plan is. Sometimes if we feel like that something might be a little riskier than what we're comfortable with, we never allow risk that we're not uncomfortable with, basically, you know, so we have to be comfortable with it first. but most of the time we're comfortable with it.
And it seems like most of your staff is kind of on the same page. Some programs I see, different staff members have different fears around things, and that limits some of the risky play in some things. Marcos or Janelle, do you have anything to share about risky play in your spaces?
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's hard for me to think of like risky play, but I think my bar is higher maybe than most people. It just seems like play to me. We don't have a lot of climbable trees at our main property, but they can climb trees when we get up to the orchard. But what I wanted to comment on was that I've noticed that when you allow children to play at their comfort level, that they will often they know what they're capable of, and they will do things at their own comfort level. Just last week, we had a child who is new to kind of our afternoon program, which happens mostly in the backyard, and we have these trails. There's kind of a sharp corner in one of them that started to erode. So you really, I mean, it's not just a flat trail. You really kind of have to use your balance to get around and not kind of like gently slide down that slope there. And he came to me and he said, Miss Janelle, I went on the trail all by myself and I wasn't afraid. And, you know, like this is a 4-year-old child, and, you know, we've got 2-year-olds who are navigating that all the time with no problem. But to him, it was a really big deal because he had mastered that, and he was feeling really proud of himself. And we've had other moments of that, of things that, you know, some kids engage in a lot of risky play very easily, and other kids are more hesitant. But when we sort of allow them to move at their own pace and what's comfortable for their bodies, we talk a lot about how if you're feeling afraid, that's your body telling you that you need to wait a little bit. So that's kind of how we manage some of those things.
What a great example of developing that persistence and resilience, some of those executive functioning skills that students, children need, and allowing them to do it at their pace. And just with tree climbing, you know, like people sometimes want to put kids up in a tree, but then they miss out on developing those skills that they need to get up in the tree to begin with, and such. So completely understand what you're saying. Marcos?
Yeah, the thing I'm reflecting on is that as we kind of learned about risky play in kind of this context and this pedagogy, we were doing it alongside some public school teachers who had no experience with it whatsoever. And so as we were going through that year of exploring and kind of giving ourselves permission to let kids get off trail a little bit more at our site, for example, one thing kind of upon reflection on that is that we were trying to move from the automatic no to how can I make this into a yes? Because a lot of times, you know, when you feel like you're responsible for kids, especially if you're used to more traditional settings, it's no, don't get on that, or no, get down from there, or no, you're going to get muddy. And instead, we had to train ourselves to think more of how can I actually allow this to happen? What are the things that I'm feeling uncomfortable about? And which of them are because of a safety issue and which of them are because of a convenience issue? Because kids getting muddy is rarely actually risky. It's a mess for me to deal with, and I have to have a system for that. But for those times when it is a safety issue, one of the things that we went to again and again and again in that first year when we were training ourselves was to say out loud to the student, are you feeling safe with what you're doing right now? And a lot of times that worked out really great, especially early in the year. And so we would then talk through like, well, why aren't you feeling safe? Or, you know, I'm noticing blah, blah, blah. Well, one thing that we encountered is that as we went on through the year, eventually the kids' answers went from, yes, I'm feeling safe to, or they went from, no, I'm not feeling safe to, yeah, I'm feeling great about this. And all of a sudden the teachers were saying, maybe I'm not feeling safe about what you're doing. And so we had to switch and then have to learn to articulate, I'm noticing that there are sharp sticks under where you're climbing, or I'm noticing a cracking sound. And so part of what we are doing when we're doing that as educators is saying out loud and verbalizing so that the students have the benefit of the thinking that we have as experienced adults with these hazards or risks, but we're not robbing them of the opportunity to learn to assess that themselves. So that's something that we had to think a lot about. And apart from that, I would say that we have kind of some some of the same things that happen in the field overall. So like the rule, one teacher, one risk is one that we often use. And so to be real concrete about that, if there's kids that are climbing on the log, and let's say there's more than two or so, that they might be, you know, running into each other or colliding or whatnot, we'll have a teacher over there. And when we introduced using a hand saw to cut wood, we have one teacher that's dedicated to that saw so that they can teach the students how to use it. And we don't just have the saws out, you know, willy-nilly like we might, you know, shovels or mud kitchen supplies, because they have a different level of risk. And so those are just things that we're very intentional about and very thoughtful about. And we've deliberately built a shared understanding among our educators and the partners at the YMCA who are co-teachers with us, so that we can have shared language and understanding and expectations. Because at some point we do have to have a rule about climbing because of our needs. And so our rule is, if a teacher couldn't reach up to help you get down if they had to, then that's too high. Now, we rarely do that, and we try not to, because we don't want to rob them of the opportunity to figure out, oh, I got too high, now I have to get out of this situation. But we also don't want a kid that's 20 feet up in the air where we can't reach them. So that's like just the concrete example for our site on climbing as an example.
Yeah, thank you. I did share a resource in the chat about some of those question stems that you can ask with, or I noticed this is happening, what's your plan? Just to help understand, change our vocabulary, and from saying be careful to some building that risk negotiation in the children themselves. So so you've talked about so many great things, and what has been helpful for you as far as some of those procedures and your policies, your ways of doing things that have helped overcome some of the challenges and helped you be able to deal with the mud, the weather, you know, any of those things that have helped you just as part of, because like the classroom management and traditional indoor classroom may be quite different than being outside. What are some of those management things, policies, and just procedures that you've kind of just built in that have been successful for you?
Well, I can start off on kind of the policies and procedure around gear and the clothing, because that's often a question that people have around these programs. And so for the forest kindergartens that we've helped with, in both cases, they have decided to purchase a set for the school to own of something or another. So in some cases, that was the brand called Frog Togs. When we did our nature preschool, we purchased some Oki wear. But basically, we've gone with the kind of intermediate season where it's rainy, muddy, but not quite to snow gear. Because in our experience, the parents often have snow pants or decent jackets. Sometimes they need some urging to really like take those seriously. But what's tricky is when it's not quite that cold or it's wet in kind of fall or late spring. And so one of the things we've just done is we've supported parents by giving that outerwear that you can layer up underneath and not have to have access to like really high quality, good gear for each individual family. And so that's something that we've done. And then I think like Janelle, you were saying, we just have had to do lots of parent education and helping to describe like, well, what does layering actually mean? And, you know, coming to school in cotton socks and rubber boots is not a good choice on a 40-degree day. And like, what other options do you have or can we support you with? And just to be real, what happens in our experience is the first cold day, that's a real learning experience for a lot of kids and families. And we try to kind of strike the balance of that's a really important learning opportunity for them with not then penalizing students that don't have the gear that they need. And so we're trying to support them so they can have a good day and a good experience over the course of the year. We also know that everyone gets a little flat-footed. They get caught flat-footed on that first cold day. We kind of rely on that to be like, oh, okay, my kid was shivering today. Like, okay, we need to be better about that. So.
Thank you very much.
I would mirror everything Marcos stated. It's a lot of educating. We just do a lot of educating other parents on what gear they need. We never used to require them to provide the mud suits. We highly encouraged it, but we didn't require it. And now we say, you have to have the mud suits. Your children have to have them. Now, that doesn't mean all of the children will wear them, but they need to provide them for them. We do have extra clothing as well, so that we can help any of the children who might not have those gear, especially on that first day, as Marco was talking about, always that catches families off guard. Indiana is just the state for wacky weather. And so we just tell parents, you got to be prepared for whatever weather might happen, have in your extra. Last Thursday, we had a lot of rain or 2 Thursdays ago, and we realized that, the children didn't have enough changes of clothing. So having more than one change of clothing was necessary for that particular day because it rained the whole day. So a lot of educating. We also realized we did not have a temperature threshold. And a lot of our parents were asking for, okay, at what point do you do the breaks, weather breaks? How often, are they staying out for the full 2 hours that they're in school, even when it's negative degrees? Well, of course, we need to have some parameters. So we have a chart that we are now using that gives temperature thresholds and how long is too long for being outside.
Thanks. Janelle, did you have any comments too?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in just in terms of like we have our mud kitchen area. We also have a digging area. That a lot of times we try to send kids home not absolutely filthy. So, I mean, if they're playing in the mud kitchen and their hands are covered with mud, I mean, right now in the warmer temperatures, we just have just a bucket of water there where they can rinse their hands off, or they will be, allowed to go inside and wash their hands in the bathroom. Or on the first day of this year, my son was playing in the digging area. I mean, he was just absolutely covered with dirt, but they at least, wiped his face and washed his hands before he came home. And sometimes too, I think children even sort of negotiate with their parents on how muddy they can get at school. Because I think we've seen that some children really enjoy mud and dirty play, and some children don't. And so a couple of years ago, one of the kindergartners in our program, her mom said, you may play in the mud as long as you help with the laundry when you come home. So some of that too is just interesting to see how different families even work on some of these issues.
That's really
one other thing that I would add to kind of this policies and protocol thing is that something that we've done last year in particular, and because it's been cold, we've gone through the cold season last year, but haven't this year as much, is that at drop-off, which would happen at the school and is conducted by our YMCA partner teachers, they've actually gone so far as to make sure that the students have what they need to go outside that day, the proper boots, proper wear. And usually this is after we know that the students have it. It's not like the very first time, right? But we make sure that they have those things before they can be dropped off. And in extreme cases, we've said, I'm sorry, your student is not prepared to learn today. You either need to go and get those things and then come back and drop them off, or you'll need to pick them up before we go to the outdoor classroom at noon. And so, you have the choice of which way you want to go with that. But in order to have a good day and to support your kids' learning, they need to be able to have all these things ready to go. And for us, that's partly because of the demographic that we have, where students are maybe being dropped off by a mom one day and then a grandparent the next day, and they're maybe going between households. And so that's just something that we've had to address because of who is coming, and trying to be helpful and responsive, but also firm that this is not just a daycare. This is a learning experience, and part of our learning experience happens outside, and you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, thank you. I do kind of wonder if you have all of this rain gear and the Oki materials and things, what's that process like for managing that with staff equipment and staff time and things, just to make it ready if it's covered in mud and then it's ready for the next day kind of thing, and storage, and just a little bit about that.
For us, what we do is that the students always strip out of their outerwear before they get on the bus to, or get picked up at our site by the parents. And so then the staff members have some like laundry bins that they shove everything into, and then it goes back to the classroom to kind of get prepped and set for the next day. And so they've got a dedicated space to hang up. We're talking about 16 kids in our program, and so that's fairly manageable, although it does take some extra time. We'll wash them, periodically when needed, but also they get dirty so quickly that it's more just, for maintenance and care. But in some cases, we're stuffing them in trash bags and then finding a place to drape them out to kind of dry out, or to dry off if it's muddy. So it's a little extra work, but it's just making sure you got the systems in place, a good place to do it, good storage location, tags so you know which one belongs to which kid, that kind of thing.
Thank you. So like, you all have a little bit more experience with this. What would you say to a program that is just starting in this journey? What would be your advice, kind of looking back at your beginning self in this journey? What would you suggest to other people?
I'll speak to that. We started a little bit at a time. We didn't rush it. We did what we were able to do at the moment. So we started with, okay, we want to have this area. So we're going to focus on that area this year. And then we increment it. That's not the right word. Gradually, I can't say the word. Gradually add it to our outdoor area. Same thing with the educating or switching our mindset regarding risky play. And I will agree with Janelle. Risky play really is just play. It's just we've had to call it that because of the change in thought processes of adults. But anyway, we just had to, little baby steps is what I would say. We just did things in baby steps. So, and every year we're adding something new or changing an element of our outdoor classroom.
I would definitely agree to that. I feel like we're, kind of the third year into our program. There's still a lot of dreams that the director and I and other staff have of things we want to do. But it's exciting to kind of be on that journey. I think I would also say that, we have 2.5 to 6-year-olds at our site, and I don't think you need to be afraid of allowing children to handle real tools, real materials, and have sort of authentic experiences. I think a lot of times in early childhood, you have sort of a fake imitation of real life. Just this last week, I was trying to, just Google search. I wanted to do some experiences with rainbows at our school, and there were just so many rainbow activities that were just not appropriate for our site, because it, make a rainbow out of, different colors from a Fruit Loop box or different things. And I ended up choosing an activity that I had found where you take different sizes of glass cups of water and you shine a flashlight through it, and that mimics the light sort of refracting and creating a rainbow. But that involved glass cups in an outdoor environment, and trusting the children that they were going to be able to use those appropriately. But I think when you scaffold those sorts of experiences for children from the very beginning of the year, when you foster a sense of independence and trust in the children that they do rise to that occasion, and like Marco said, having appropriate supervision when needed, but children really can handle and I think greatly benefit from experiences that are real and authentic.
Children are so capable. Thank you for bringing that up, Janelle. Marcos, did you have additional thoughts?
Yeah, I've got two pieces of advice. My first one is commit to it and then go for it. And what I mean by that is early on, we got to like that first November day and it was kind of rainy and it was going to be, I don't know, 40s or whatever. And all the educators, this is when we were brand new, we're all kind of looking around and being like, okay, so we said we were going to do this all year round. Are we actually going to do this, or should we call it because it's a rainy day? And, that day we learned a lot. And one of the things that we learned is that the kids were much more happy being out there than the adults. And so if it's about the kids, then we're going to have to just get over that. And so don't balk away from that first, really challenging weather day, really go for it. And then my second one is that I find that physical structures in terms of things like lean-tos or trail shelters or covered spaces, physical structures are often mental crutches. And there are times when you really do need a little shelter. You need to get out of the rain, you need, a windbreak or whatever. But also it is completely possible to do this without any kind of fancy infrastructure or wooden built anything. And like the others have been saying, doing it in small steps, small increments, small time frames is just fine. And so if you don't feel comfortable being outside all day without some kind of a physical structure to retreat to, then just do it for half a day or do it for a 2-hour chunk or something like that. And you'll be amazed at what you can do and how you aren't reliant on fancy or expensive infrastructure to be able to do really good quality work with students outside.
Thank you.
I 100% agree with Marcos. I would add to that because it's very true. And early on, one of the first things that happened to us when the weather started getting cold or we'd have a rainy day, and the parents would come and they're like, "You're not going out, are you?" I'm like, "Yes," and they wouldn't bring their children in the proper gear because they just assumed that we weren't going to stand by our word. And we're like, "Yes, we're standing by our word." That is happening this year with COVID when we say we're 100% outside the whole time, unless we need to go in for weather breaks or unless, the temperature reaches, and parents are like, "You're really going to be outside?" I'm like, "Yes, we're really going to be outside and the children will be okay." And I have to tell them, the children aren't the ones bothered by the temperature. Typically it's the adults. So
I've seen and hear that all the time. So mentioning that, and it's about time. So if people have questions, you need to put them in the chat or unmute so that we can hear them. But we are getting closer. It sounds like it's beautiful in Indiana today. However, we're getting closer to that cooler weather. Do you have a minimum threshold? How do you decide kind of on that? I did hear a program earlier in the sessions where they zeros their bottom level. I know I work with one preschool, 25 is their bottom level with wind chill. And so every morning before I go in to that space, I'm like, can we be outside or not? So I'm always like changing my plan for our nature programming that we have there. So what is your bottom level if you have one? How do you determine that? And then what tips do you have for being outside in winter when it may not be as comfortable or what people are used to? Maybe I think it's more what people are used to. So what advice do you have for that winter?
Our minimum level is feels like 10 degrees. So that's with wind chill in the winter. And every year we've gone down about 5 degrees on that threshold. So it'll be interesting to see what we choose this year. Yeah, I mean, I think like my number one thing that I really talk to parents about is waterproof gloves in the winter. I mean, even the thick cotton gloves, they just don't hold up. And I feel like a child with cold hands is a child who is not learning and not playing and not enjoying their time outside. And a child with warm hands and warm feet, they are learning, they are playing, and, warm boots, snow pants, coats, all those things. But I feel like the waterproof gloves for our program has just been an issue where we really need to educate parents on that. And then I think just in the winter, just encouraging children to have those large body movements. We get out the sleds. We try to introduce running games. I mean, you always have the kid who just, you have more of your introverted children who just kind of want to sit on a rock, and really trying to engage them to move their bodies to create some more body heat is valuable.
Yeah, what I would add to that is that I think our minimum is 0 degrees also. And if you really pushed us, it would be that, we're paying attention to, there's like a stair step graphic that describes how long of an exposure time until frostbite were to occur. And so like, that's the thing we're really concerned about. And honestly, the 0 degrees or whatever the threshold is it's nice to have that as a guidance, but we're thinking a lot about where we are and who is there. And it's just going to be the case that some of your little people are going to be, they run cold, and you can put however many layers you want on them. They just don't keep that heat in. And so we have to watch for that. It doesn't matter what the threshold is. If they're starting to shiver, or if we're seeing concerning signs, then we change what we're doing on that day. Our program is outside for 2 hours every day. And so 0 degrees means something very different to us than for someone who's also having a meal outside and is out there for 4 hours. And frankly, like, there's some days where we just have to make a different call than what our like threshold or policy is. So that's there for us as kind of a baseline, but we're very reactive and responsive to what's actually going on at a given moment.
And I would agree with Marcos. We don't really have a set temperature. Ours goes based on that stair step. So the length of time that we stay out, it may change according to whether it's 0 degrees versus 20 degrees versus 40 degrees. And so that's what we base ours on as well. And Marcos is exactly right. There's, different children warrant different considerations. Now, I know this year, since we're planning to be out 100% of the time, we are looking into purchasing heaters that can be used with safety precautions. Obviously, we have a firefighter who is on our one of our parents, and he's doing some research on, the safety factor. We do have an outdoor playhouse that's 3-sided that allows the children to get in and out of the weather a little bit. And I say children, but the adults tend to be there more than the children. You're right. It is a crutch. Shelter is a crutch. But it is a good opportunity for them to at least get out of the wind for a little bit if they need to. And gear is so critical. So.
Maybe the one thing I'll add then to kind of wrap that up is, I was going to start to type this in, but I'll just say it. You can always point to someone somewhere in the world or continent or country that is outside for longer and in colder weather than what your people, your stakeholders are comfortable with. So use them as scapegoats. Like, well, in Minnesota, they, take naps outside in hammocks. So, okay, great. Like, we're not being that crazy. We're going to be this crazy. And you can get people on board with you with that. And also learn from those people. Like, what is the clothing that they're wearing? Is it just cultural and mindset? Like, what is it that we can address here that pushes us a little bit so that we're able to be outside that much longer?
Yeah, I refer my parents to the book, There's No Bad Clothing by Linda, I think it's
McGurk.
Linda McGurk. Yes.
I've shared a hotel room with her
we
before.
talk a lot about that. Oh, wow.
She's great. Yeah. She's really good. She's back in her home country, but from Indiana. I mean, that's where she wrote most of her book and such, and had her experiences in the United States more so with that. So yeah, there are so many books that are great. And I have so many more questions, but our time has sadly come to an end. And I appreciate this. And I appreciate you continuing conversations with people and all that you're doing. You all give me a lot of hope for this nature-based early childhood education movement in the state of Indiana. And I appreciate the different perspectives that you bring and the work that you do with the children and educators and parents and your community all the time. Oops, appreciate it. We do have field trips and then a farewell, just quick little goodbye thing later this afternoon. And thank you all for joining us. And I look forward to continued conversations. Hopefully the conference is not just a one and done deal, but something that inspires us to take action. if you're still on the line, if you haven't figured out one thing that you want to do as a result of the conference, I encourage you to start thinking about that so that you can kind of document and start working towards it. And I'll send an announcement out about that as well. So thank you all so much for your time. We really, truly appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.